When I took the night shift at the subway off Miners Vein Road, I wasn't expecting much. Just a paycheck, maybe a few footlongs to take home, and a few hours where nobody could ask me for anything. That was the whole point of graveyard shifts. You got to be invisible, and for once, I liked the sound of that. The store itself sat on the very edge of Red Hollow, right where the trees started to crowd out the cell signal. Most people didn't even know Red Hollow was a town. GPS barely acknowledged it, and even when it did, it liked to drop pins in the middle of the forest or dump you down a dead-end logging road. The only real landmarks were the rusted skeletons of mining equipment and a few long-abandoned sheds sagging under their own roofs. Someone had nailed plastic sheets over the windows a while back, but time and wind had done their work. I didn't ask why anyone thought to put a subway out here. I just needed the money. I was 21, a couple months past caring about dignity, and a couple $100 short of rent. My little brother needed new school supplies, and our landlord wasn't the type to wait politely. So when Darren, the guy who technically managed the place, called me in for a quick interview, that was really just him half nodding through a yawn, I said yes, before he even offered the job. Darren looked like a walking caffeine crash. His eyes were glassy like he hadn't slept since 2007. And his voice had that distant, barely holding it together tone that told me he'd stopped caring about anything that wasn't on fire. He handed me a single key, a pair of gloves, and a name tag that still had someone else's name on it. "Don't worry too much about the weirdos," he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just lock up behind you and don't leave the back door open." Weirdos. Great. I started the next night. The first hour passed like I figured it would. Just me, the buzz of old fluorescent lights, and the cold company of sandwich meats. There wasn't a single customer. Honestly, I didn't mind. I wiped down the counter twice, rearranged the chip bags until they made sense, counted the register even though Darren told me not to bother. Silence stretched between everything like chewing gum, thin, sticky, and impossible to shake off. Somewhere in the distance, a truck rumbled past through the fog, then disappeared down the empty stretch of road. Then it was quiet again. It was so boring, so still. I almost didn't notice the break room door was cracked open. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I pushed it open with my shoulder, expecting maybe a cleaning supply shelf or a tiny employee locker. What I got instead was a small, square room with a sagging table, a secondhand microwave, and a fridge that growled like it had indigestion. The air in there was colder, not AC cold, deeper than that. Like basement cold, like cave cold, the kind of cold that makes your teeth hurt without touching anything. I rubbed my arms and stepped inside. A couple old receipts curled on the table. Someone had scribbled something in Sharpie on the wall, but it was faded beyond saving. And taped above the microwave, crooked, wrinkled, and sun-bleached, was a single sheet of paper. The edges were curling like they'd been there for years, but the words were sharp and clear. Night shift rules. Do not ignore. 1. At 12:20 a.m., place a ham kid's meal, with apple slices and chocolate milk, on the table nearest the freezer. Do not speak to the girl in the yellow raincoat. 2. If a man arrives at the drive-thru in a car with no plates, prepare a veggie delight. Wheat, no cheese, double cucumber, 1 drop of red wine vinegar. Hand it over with the words, "Safe travels." 3. If a crying woman enters wearing a funeral veil, toast a tuna sandwich with pickles. Fold the napkin into a triangle and hand it to her silently. Do not speak unless she finishes her story. 4. If the man in gauze walks in, give him a meatball sub with extra sauce in a brown paper bag. Avoid eye contact. 5. If an old man with a gold watch enters at 3:03 a.m., serve him a roast beef footlong, no condiments, and a plain white cookie. You have 5 minutes. Do not make him wait. I let out a short, dry breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Ghost rules. Cute. I mean, I'd seen worse taped to break room walls, memes with Comic Sans font, handwritten passive-aggressive notes about cleaning out the fridge, that kind of thing. This, it almost felt like someone's idea of a local prank. A little haunted fun for the new girl. Still, something about the way it was worded got under my skin. Do not ignore. Not, please read. Not, just in case. There was no smiley face or sarcastic tone. It was direct. Like whoever wrote it had meant every word. I took a photo of the list with my phone anyway. If nothing else, I figured I could show it to Darren later and get a laugh out of him. Then I went back to the front, settled behind the counter, and watched the digital clock on the register tick toward midnight. 12:18 a.m., the door creaked open. At first, I thought it was the wind. The town had this way of pressing in at night, like it was waiting for something. But when I looked up, I saw her, standing just a few feet from the freezer. A little girl in a yellow raincoat, soaked to the bone. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Because the wet footprints she left behind didn't lead from the entrance. They didn't lead from anywhere at all. She didn't move, just stood there, soaking wet, her arms limp at her sides. The hood of her raincoat dripped steadily onto the floor, and underneath the yellow vinyl, her hair was plastered to her cheeks in dark, matted strings. I don't know how long I stared, maybe 5 seconds, maybe a full minute. I couldn't tell. Everything around her seemed to dim. The buzzing overhead lights took on a flickering pulse. Not all at once, just the ones nearest the freezer, blinking slower than the rest. My body didn't move, but I could feel my pulse picking up like my heart was trying to outrun my brain. The list. I snapped out of it and fumbled for my phone. The photo was still open. There she was. First rule. At 12:20 a.m., place a ham kid's meal with apple slices and chocolate milk on the table nearest the freezer. Do not speak to the girl in the yellow raincoat. I swallowed hard and turned toward the prep station. Ham sandwich, apples, chocolate milk. My hands shook, but they worked. I pulled a fresh mini sub roll, stacked the ham slices, skipped the cheese, skipped the veggies. My breath sounded too loud in the stillness, like I was shouting with each exhale. She still hadn't moved. I grabbed the pre-sliced apple bag from the fridge and tucked in the chocolate milk carton. My eyes flicked to the freezer table, a round two top closest to where she stood. I hesitated. Something in me rebelled, like a stubborn corner of my brain refused to treat any of this seriously. It felt like playing along with a prank I wasn't in on. The part of me that had scraped through too many days of not being taken seriously by landlords, classmates, exes. So I placed the tray on the table by the soda fountain instead. Right then, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, not like a breeze. It was like someone poured ice water down the back of my neck. The lights above the freezer flickered again, but this time it wasn't rhythmic. They blinked out, one by one. Flick, flick, flick. My eyes darted back to her. She was still staring, except now her head had lifted slightly, just enough for me to see under the hood. There was no face, not a blank canvas, not a mask, just a void, a hole where a child's face should have been. A shape my eyes couldn't settle on, like trying to look through thick smoke and shadow. No nose, no mouth, just the suggestion of something hollow and endless. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I stepped back, nearly bumping into the chip rack. The lights continued to die. Flick, flick, flick. By the time the last bulb over the freezer gave out, the girl was gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no exit chime, no splash of water where she'd been. Only the tray sat there, still full. I fumbled for my phone. The screen wouldn't wake. I glanced at the register clock. 1:26 a.m. I blinked. That couldn't be right. I swore it had only been 12:20 a minute ago. Had I passed out? Zoned out? Slept standing up? No. I knew what I'd felt. I remembered the cold, the flickering, the darkness crawling in like mold under a door. And now, over an hour was missing. My stomach twisted as the realization settled in. Rule 1. Broken. Something had happened. Something real. And I didn't do what the rule told me to do. I grabbed the kid's tray and dumped it in the trash without thinking. The ham smelled off. The apples were browning around the edges. I wiped my hands on a napkin and leaned against the counter, trying to slow my breathing. Maybe I was dreaming. That thought came in and left just as fast. The cold had been too real, the silence too sharp. I turned toward the break room, half expecting that list to have vanished, but it hadn't. It was still taped there, right above the microwave, just as crooked as before. Then came the second chime. The drive-through buzzer lit up red. I turned, heart still racing, throat dry. The intercom crackled. Veggie delight, wheat, double cucumber, no cheese, splash of vinegar. The voice barely came through the static, low, muffled, distant. But I recognized the order instantly. Rule 2. If a man arrives at the drive-thru in a car with no plates, prepare a veggie delight. Wheat, no cheese, double cucumber, 1 drop of red wine vinegar. Handed over with the words, "Safe travels." I rushed to the sandwich bar. My hands moved faster this time. I couldn't stop glancing at the clock, 1:36 a.m., and back to the side window, where shadows shifted under the weak overhead lights. I was still shaking from the girl in the raincoat. Still felt her presence hanging somewhere in the corners of the store, like the dampness had never really left. I slapped the veggie sandwich together. Wheat bread, double cucumber, no cheese. But when I went to grab the vinegar bottle, it wasn't there. I panicked, checked under the counter, behind the sauces, nothing. I even opened the fridge and looked in the back. No red wine vinegar. The intercom crackled again, louder this time. Not a voice, just static, like a warning. I gave up, closed the sandwich, wrapped it tightly, and headed to the window. I still had one last thing to say, and I could still get it right. As I stepped forward, the car came into view. It was matte black, too clean, too still, like it wasn't part of the real world. The windows were tinted darker than the night around it, and where the license plate should have been, nothing. I opened the drive-through window and held the sandwich out with both hands. And that's when my brain betrayed me. The phrase, the words I was thinking of just a couple seconds ago, gone. I stared at the car, my mouth half open, trying to force something out, but the fear clogged up my throat. My tongue sat useless in my mouth. The silence stretched too long. Finally, I handed it over. No vinegar, no phrase, just trembling fingers and a tight jaw. The hand that took the sandwich was pale, fingers like twigs wrapped in wax paper. I barely caught a glimpse before it disappeared inside the car again. Then the window fogged up. From the inside, I took a step back. Fog isn't supposed to work like that. Not that fast, not that thick. The glass turned milky, then opaque. And then came the sound, right beside my hand, sharp, precise, rhythmic. I flinched and slammed the window shut, locked it without thinking, backed away until I hit the soda machine behind me. I stood there for what felt like a lifetime, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The tapping didn't continue. The car didn't drive off. It just sat there, surrounded by fog it shouldn't have made. Eventually, I forced myself to move. Not toward the window, never again toward the window, but toward the register. I kept my eyes down. Focused on the tray, I pretended to wipe for the 5th time. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from breaking. Rule 2, broken. I was 0 for 2. And things were getting worse. I didn't want to read the list again, but I knew I had to. I pulled it back up on my phone. Rule 3. If a crying woman enters wearing a funeral veil, toast a tuna sandwich with pickles. Fold the napkin into a triangle and hand it to her silently. Do not speak unless she finishes her story. I leaned against the counter and tried to breathe. My thoughts kept jumping between fear and logic, telling myself it had to be a prank, a long con, some elaborate joke on the new girl. But I couldn't explain the missing time, or how cold the room still felt. And then the door chime rang. I knew before I looked. The woman entered slowly. A black veil draped over her face. Her dress clung to her body like it had been soaked in ash and grief. She didn't walk. She drifted, feet barely lifting. Her hands were clasped in front of her like she was holding something invisible. The smell hit me next. Roses, fresh and dying at the same time. And beneath that, dirt, wet earth. The kind that clings to caskets and the bottom of boots after a funeral. She didn't look at me. She just cried. No sobs, no wailing. Just this constant, low keening that came from somewhere deep inside her chest. It didn't even sound human. More like something mourning through a throat too tired to scream. I forced my legs to move. Went to the prep station. Tuna sandwich. Pickles. Toasted. That part I remembered. My hands moved automatically. The crying didn't stop. Didn't slow. If anything, it grew sharper the closer I got to finishing. I placed the sandwich on a tray, reached for a napkin, folded it into a triangle like I was folding a flag at a military funeral. Clean edges, careful corners. I stepped forward and placed the tray gently on the counter. She didn't move. Her crying softened, just barely, like she'd noticed the offering. And then she began to speak. I should have stayed silent. That's what the rules said. But after everything, after the hour lost in the blood and the tapping, something cracked in me. I was tired. I was scared. I wanted to feel human again. So I opened my mouth and asked, "Are you okay?" Her head snapped up. Her eyes were black. Not empty. Not hollow. Just black. like something full was looking out from behind them. Something ancient. The crying stopped. She opened her mouth and a sound came out. Not a word, not a language I'd ever heard, but I understood it anyway. I heard about a house on fire, about a child lost in the smoke, about locked doors and a scream that never got answered. I saw flashes, photos that didn't belong to me, of a nursery, of a crib, of tiny shoes left in the ash. I felt it. Her grief poured into me like thick smoke. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It wasn't just sadness, it was despair, multiplied 100 times and soaked into every bone in my body. When she stopped speaking, the silence hit like a drop from a cliff. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the cookie display. She turned and walked out without another sound. The air felt thin. I gasped like I'd been underwater. My head swam, my legs barely held me up. Rule 3, broken, and I still had hours to go. At 2:22 a.m., the store changed. Not the layout, not the lighting, not even the hum of the fridge motors. Just the air. It thickened. I could feel it in my chest. My skin prickled, my fingertips twitched, and the little hairs on my arms stood up straight without warning. There was no door chime this time. No soft cry, no warning. I just felt it. Then I saw the puddle forming near the entrance. Dark, slow, spreading across the tile like oil. I took one step forward and nearly gagged. The smell hit like a freight train, copper and cold metal. Rule 4. If the man in gauze walks in, give him a meatball sub with extra sauce in a brown paper bag. Avoid eye contact. I didn't need a second look to know he was here. I didn't hear him walk in. Didn't see the door move, but when I looked up, he was standing near the counter, about 4 feet away. Bandages wrapped his face completely, except they weren't white. They were stained rust red, streaked with something darker. His coat hung off him in tatters, soaked through with slush or something colder. One of his arms dangled, broken looking. The fingers twitched sporadically. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there. Breathing, uneven breaths that rattled like nails in a tin can. I reached for the meatballs. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the ladle. The sauce splashed onto the counter. I forced myself not to look up. I wanted to. I needed to. My instincts screamed to see what I was dealing with. But I remembered the pain from earlier, the missing hour, the fog. This was worse. I could feel it. I shoved extra sauce into the bread, wrapped the sandwich, grabbed a brown paper bag. It soaked through almost immediately. My apron sleeve brushed the bag, and the warmth of it made me recoil. I slid it across the counter without looking up. My fingers grazed the edge of the register. That's when I made the mistake. Just a glance, a flicker of curiosity. I looked up. It wasn't even a full second. My eyes connected with where his should have been under the gauze, and something behind the bandages looked straight back and smiled. I didn't know how I could tell. There was no mouth, no visible expression. But I felt it. That knowing, skin-crawling grin that something wears when it's waited for you to mess up. Pain exploded across my ribs. I gasped, stumbled backward. Heat bloomed under my shirt like someone had jammed a hot iron against my skin. I pressed my hand to my side and pulled it back slick with blood. Not his, mine. I collapsed behind the counter, knocking over the napkin bin as I hit the tile. Every breath came shorter, shallower. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just stared at the bottom of the prep counter while warm blood soaked into my pants and pooled against my hip. Somewhere above me, the door chimed again. Then, silence. I waited, counted to 10, then 20. Eventually, I peeled my body off the ground and crawled to the back room. My shirt stuck to my skin, and every motion sent fresh shocks of pain through my chest. I pulled it up slowly, bracing for something broken or slashed wide open. But there was nothing. No wound, just blood. Drying, sticky, real, but no cut, no hole. I sat in the break room for a while, pressing a cold soda can against my ribs and trying not to throw up. The list was still taped to the wall, mocking me. Rule 4, broken. 1 hour to go, and I didn't know how much of me would be left by the end of it. When I finally stood and stumbled out to the counter, I caught my reflection in the drive-through window. Dark circles, wild eyes, blood-stained shirt. I looked like someone who'd survived a car crash and walked away too calm. Then the lights dimmed, not flickered, dimmed. The digital clock read 3:02 a.m. I already knew who was next. The clock ticked from 3:02 to 3:03 a.m. The second it changed, the door opened without a sound. He didn't stomp in like the others. didn't appear out of nowhere. Mr. Dalton just walked. Calm, deliberate, polished shoes clicking soft against the tile, hands tucked neatly into his pockets. He looked like someone who didn't belong in a subway, or anywhere in Red Hollow for that matter. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly pressed, with faint pinstripes that shimmered under the lights. The pocket watch chain dangled just slightly from his vest. Every step he took was perfectly measured. I didn't need the list this time. His rule was etched into my brain by now. Rule 5. If an old man with a gold watch enters at 3:03 a.m., serve him a roast beef footlong, no condiments, and a plain white cookie. You have 5 minutes. Do not make him wait. I moved fast. Roast beef. No condiments, no cheese, just meat and bread. I tried to keep my hands from shaking, but it was like my muscles were on their own schedule. Every movement dragged. The knives felt heavier. The gloves clung to my skin like wet paper. I glanced at the timer on the oven as I grabbed the cookie, barely warm from the last batch. He stood perfectly still at the counter, eyes locked on me. The pocket watch ticked softly, click, click, click. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Each tick felt louder than the last. I sliced the sandwich in half, wrapped it tight, placed it on a tray with the cookie, and slid it onto the counter. My breath caught. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just stared. I looked down at the tray just to double-check. Bread intact. Roast beef exact. No pickles, no sauce, no mustard. But the moment I hesitated, just one heartbeat too long, he tilted his head slightly to the side, and I saw the watch glint as it swung forward. Click. The second hand jerked, backwards. My vision shimmered. The hum of the fridge turned hollow, echoing like I was inside a tunnel. Every sound stretched out and looped over itself. My legs buckled slightly as the lights flickered, not just dimming this time, but warping. I blinked, and the cookie disappeared from the tray. Blink again, and the sandwich vanished too. Mr. Dalton smiled. Not cruel, not pleased, just understanding. Like he'd seen this happen before. And then, everything rewound. The blood on my shirt dried in an instant. My ribs stopped aching. My chest filled with air, like I'd been pulled from underwater. The pain evaporated, leaving only silence. I watched the last hour unravel. The puddle near the entrance sucked back into the floor. The bandaged man rewound like a reverse video, vanishing into shadows. Miriam's veil fluttered in reverse wind, her cries twisting backward into silence as she walked back out the door. The fog returned to the window. The tapping never happened. Even the lights rewound. Bulbs that had died flickered back to life. The hums, the smells, the cold, all reversed. And then I was standing in the break room, reading the list. For the first time, but it wasn't the first time. Not anymore. My body remembered what had happened, even if time didn't. My bones ached with the pressure of that rewind. My hands still shook, even though they were clean. The photo on my phone was still there. This had happened, all of it. Somewhere out there, those hours still existed. They just didn't belong to this version of the night anymore. I stepped out of the break room, glancing at the counter like I half expected the girl in the yellow raincoat to already be waiting. Not yet. I moved fast, prepped the kids' meal exactly as listed. Ham sandwich, apple slices, chocolate milk. I placed it on the table nearest the freezer. Then I waited. The door creaked, and she appeared again, silent, dripping, her hair hanging like black cords across her face. But this time, I didn't flinch, I didn't hesitate, and I didn't break the rule. She stood there for a few long moments, unmoving. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward the meal. She walked over, lifted the tray without looking at me, and vanished through the darkness beside the freezer. The lights stayed on, no flickering, no skipped time. I let out a slow, shaky breath. One rule followed. I didn't know how many loops it had taken me to get this far. I didn't know if this time was going to be the last, but I was going to make it count. The moment the girl disappeared with her tray, the air changed. I didn't mean temperature or pressure. I mean the weight. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for what felt like hours lifted just a little, enough to let me take a real breath without coughing up fear. I stayed frozen in place for a few seconds, half expecting the lights to flicker or the clock to skip ahead. But nothing happened. The bulbs kept buzzing, the register hummed quietly, and the freezer motor chugged along like nothing strange had ever happened. I checked my phone. 12:24 a.m. Time was holding. My hands were still trembling, and my shirt still clung to my back with sweat. But for the first time all night, I didn't feel like I was being watched. I leaned against the counter and looked around the store. Same mismatched tables. Same faded posters of new sandwich combos no one ever orders. Same chip rack, except now it looked a little more harmless. The next rule would come soon. I knew it. The man at the drive-thru, the crying woman, the bandaged thing that shouldn't exist. And eventually, the clock man. They were coming. But I'd be ready this time, because this wasn't the first time I'd done this. Every part of me knew when to tense, when to flinch, when to act. I could feel the timing in my bones, like the beat of a song I hadn't realized I knew the words to. Some versions of the night had gone worse. I didn't have all the memories, just fragments. Pain in my ribs that shouldn't be there. A lingering whisper that played over my dreams. The burn of hot breath against my cheek when I'd looked up at the wrong moment. But this time was different. This time, I had something close to control. I walked to the break room again, just to check. The list was still there, taped above the microwave, just as wrinkled and crooked as before. But now I knew it wasn't a joke. I stared at it for a long while, then I spoke out loud, just to hear my own voice again. Not screwing this up twice. A small promise. I headed back out and started prepping the next order ahead of time. Veggie delight. Wheat, no cheese, double cucumber, 1 drop of red wine vinegar. I placed the bottle of vinegar right where I could see it, practiced the phrase once under my breath, safe travels. The buzzer hadn't even gone off yet, but I knew it would. Then the crying woman, then the bleeding man, then the clockman, resetting everything again if I failed. I didn't know how many loops I'd have left. Maybe it was infinite. Maybe it was 1. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not because I'd figured everything out, but because I'd already survived worse. Because the thing about being stuck in a loop? Eventually, you stop hoping someone will come save you. You just learn to save yourself.